Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Thank you, Dr. Ramesh. Vikas has spoken about the surgery part of the enucleation and the evisceration. So it really happens these days that we do the surgery without an implant. So most of the cases, even in the tumors and all, we are putting the implant during the time of surgery itself. So I'll be talking about how there are different types of implants which are available, which can be used for different type of surgeries, enucleation and evisceration. So I'll just give a broad guideline of how to go about when we have to choose the implant. I don't have any financial interest in any of the products which I'll be showing in this presentation. So Vikas has already highlighted that putting an orbital implant is very essential whenever we are doing a surgery. So mainly because it replaces the orbital volume, which is very essential for giving a cosmesis, giving better cosmesis by filling up the superior sulcal deformity and also by correcting the enophthalmos. It also helps in giving the movement to the processes, which is again very essential from the cosmesis point of view. So what should be the property? If you are talking of an ideal orbital implant, what all are we looking at? It should restore the orbital volume and make it as symmetrical as possible with the other eye. It should allow movement of the ocular processes. There should not be any exposure, any migration. In children, it should probably stimulate growth of the orbit also, and it should be easily available and inexpensive. So none of the implants which are currently available actually fulfills all these criteria completely. I'll be talking about the common ones which fills many of these criteria and which we are mostly using these days. Orbital implant has undergone a sea change from the 1880s, from where Mules had first put his glass spherical implant to the current implants, the expandable ones which are being used. The initial phases of the implants which were used was basically to augment the volume, and then came the semi-integrated implants to increase the movement also. But both these implants have become obsolete because of the high rate of extrusion and the infection which they used to cause. Currently what we are using are the simple spherical PMM and the acrylic implants or the silicone ones, which are the phase 3 implants, where the emphasis was mainly to augment the volume, to give the movement, and also at the same time decrease the possibility of migration and extrusion of the implant. And the next phase of the implants which are being used again are the bio-integrated implants, the porous implants, and also the expandable implants which are being used for the microphthalmos. Now, if you have to choose an implant, how do you go about it? Basically, these are the three considerations that we have. What to implant means what material should be used, what size to implant, and where to implant in the orbit. So these are the main questions which we need to answer. I'll go to it step by step. The acrylic ones are the ones which are most commonly used. These are basically inert, spherical, non-integrated implants. They have a very smooth surface, which it's a non-porous material. So the implantation is very easier while using these implants. They come in different sizes, and we can choose them according to the volume augmentation that is required. And since they are non-porous, have smooth surface, the chances of infection, if the surgery is done using proper technique, is actually quite low. But since they are non-integrated, the problem of decreased movement always remains a question. Are they actually able to give as much mobility as an integrated implant is supposed to give? So it can, if used properly, it remains quite in the central space, gives nice volume augmentation, and when fitted with the prosthesis, the cosmetic appearance is quite acceptable. There are certain drawbacks like exposure of the implant, migration of the implant, since we are not integrating them to the extraocular muscles, so they can migrate most commonly in the inferior orbit. Exposure can also happen, but it's probably rare as compared to the integrated implants, the porous implants. And it's possibly more because of the technique of the surgery that we are using, meaning that if the closure is not secure, if you're not closing the tenons, conjunctiva and the other tissues in evisceration, for example, the sclera in layers, then the exposure possibly can happen. And also migration is again probably because of the technique of the surgery that we are adopting. If you are putting the implants nicely within the intraconal space in the posterior orbit as much as possible, this complication should also be rare. Reduced movements is another issue which always remains with them, but as Vikas has already shown the myoconjunctival technique of enucleation, where the muscles are actually sutured to the respective fornices. So it's actually the movement of the fornices which is going to the prosthesis. So along with the movement of the implant, some movement of the fornices are also being imparted to the prosthesis, which is causing the prosthesis to move. So with this technique, even using a PMMA implant, probably the motility issues are not as bad, and the studies does show that the movements are comparable to the sometimes even to the eviscerations also. The biointegrated ones or the porous implants are the one which has come up in the 80s. So here the issue was that with the availability of a pegging system where the motility peg can be put inside the implant, can be drilled inside the implant, which connects the implant with the prosthesis so that the movement of the implant can be directly imparted to the prosthesis. So this required that the implant needs to be vascularized completely before we put a peg because we can't put a foreign body inside another foreign body. So that's how the integrated implant came into picture. The hydroxyapatite is the one which was initially used. Then the porous polyethylene came up. The problem with the hydroxyapatite was that it has a very rough surface. It's almost like inserting a apatite implant inside the socket is like almost pushing a cactus tree throughout. It tends to stick to the orbital tissues and it tends to drag all the anterior orbital tissues into the posterior orbit, which again makes there is a tendency that the implant can always come anterior. So that was always a problem with the hydroxyapatite, but there has been refinement in the implant per se. Some coated implant coating material has been applied, which tends to get absorbed over a period of time, where the initial implantation becomes easier, and then once it's absorbed, the blood vessels can actually go inside the implants. And most of the time, it requires some wrapping material. It has to be wrapped by either using a sclera or facial atta or any other synthetic material like a Vicryl mesh or thing. Again, to insert the extraocular muscles over the implant and also to reduce this tissue drag which happens with this hydroxyapatite implant. So these are some of the implants which has been wrapped. Porous polyethylene or the Medpor implant is a little better in the sense that it's much more smoother than the hydroxyapatite. So the implantation became much more easier with this implant. Also, the pore structure is much more uniform, unlike the hydroxyapatite implant, and with much less dead spaces. So the chances of infection and the extrusion, which used to be there with the hydroxyapatite, has come down considerably. So this also works on the same principle. It allows the fibrovascular tissues to go inside the implant and the implant gets vascularized. After that, a pegging, if required, can be done. And it doesn't need any wrapping material. It can be used without wrapping it with a sclera also, and it's easier to insert the extraocular muscles also directly to the implant. It's a little softer, unlike the hydroxyapatite, which is much more brittle and hard. Cost is a little less than the hydroxyapatite implants, and one more advantage is that it can come in various shapes as per the shape of the orbit, like conical shapes, X shapes, and we have the smooth surface SST implants also, where one of the surface of the implant is made smooth, the anterior surface, and where the extraocular muscles can be attached to the side of it, and it reduces the chances of erosion of the conjunctiva and ultimate implant extrusion or exposure. So synthetic implants, we know that it has certain advantages like readily available, different sizes can be used, there is no second site, donor site morbidity and all, but at the same time they are expensive, there are chances of infection, extrusion. Considering all these things in mind, the high cost, the exposure and the infection which can happen, so probably if you are not planning to put a peg, they do not have any added advantage over the PMMA implant as such. There is no survey from the Indian subcontinent as such about the pattern of the implant which most of the oculoplastic surgeons are using, but we do have a survey from the Asia Pacific region which just shows that PMMA is still probably the most commonly used orbital implants after evisceration and enucleation. More than 90% of the respondents actually said that they would prefer putting a PMMA as it is cost effective with no added advantage over the hydroxyapatite if pegging is not planned. Coming to the dermis pad graft, its again main indication remains in children because this is supposed to be a living implant which tends to, it's supposed that it's presumed that it grows with the growth of the child. So it tends to expand the orbit also as the child grows. And right now the indications of DFG is limited to the contracted socket which has volume and surface loss, because this is a composite implant which can give volume also by the fat component and also give some surface by the dermis component. Some cases like multiple failed socket surgery, post-enucleation socket syndrome, any chronically exposed implant, and difficult cases, post-trauma, chemical injury, these are the cases where the vascularity of the socket might not be that great, then DFG might be a good option for these patients. Socket expander, I am not going into this. The next thing is what size to implant. If you put an undersized implant like this, the patient will end up with a deep superior sulcus deformity and enophthalmos, which is not cosmetically acceptable. Same for this patient who had implant was in situ but it was undersized. Look at the deep superior sulcus. So you replace the implant, put another bigger size implant, and she had a same for this patient. This is after putting the prosthesis where the volume seems to be much better than it was earlier. So size of the implant is another issue because it is supposed that the implant should actually replace about 70 to 80% of the orbital volume, and so that the prosthesis does not become too heavy, which can cause laxity of the lower lid over a period of time. A lot of work has been done by the Sarah Culfredo group in this regard, who has actually given us the algorithm that when you are putting an implant, it needs to be about axial length of the maybe the normal eye minus 2 millimeter, and for evisceration, if you are doing an evisceration, 1 more millimeter needs to be subtracted from that dimension. So we need to otherwise practically we go by the algorithm that we try to put the maximum possible size of the implant which can fit in easily without any tense closure of the conjunctiva. So where to implant? Intergonal space, if it's an enucleation, if it's an evisceration within the scleral capsule, but for cases like these where the eye is severely shrunken, severe thitis bulbi where the axial length was probably about 8 millimeter or so, it's not even measurable completely. So what we are doing currently is a modified technique. Vikas has already highlighted one part of it. This is a little different than that in the sense that we are not really cutting the 4 scleral flaps through from the anterior to the posterior. We are leaving a rim of sclera in between. It's the anterior sclerotomy, posterior sclerotomy, this insert the optic nerve here, and the implant actually goes not within the sclera now, behind the scleral shell, in the same place where an enucleation implant goes in. So we had a small study which we did at our institute where we found that in severely shrunken eye where we took patients only with axial length less than 15 millimeter, or in cases where it's not even measurable, we could actually put average implant size of about 18 millimeter in this patient by using this modified technique. Last but not the least, there will be some situation, for example like this, where post-traumatic phthisis cases where we tend to do the surgery, sometimes we tend to oversee that there might be some orbital fracture. So where just replacing the volume by removing the eye might not be adequate. We have to take care of the orbital volume also, expansion also, which happens because of the fracture, and that can be filled up by using an alloplastic implant. We used bone graft for this patient, which can ultimately give a good volume replacement. So to conclude, if it's an enlarged eyeball, blind eye which is enlarged, say a staphyloma or any eye which has an adequate volume inside, preference will be to evisceration and put a PMMA implant. If it's a severely shrunken eyeball, the preference will still be to put in modified evisceration technique, putting a PMMA implant. For the tumors, enucleation is the surgery of choice, and if you're not planning a pagging, then PMMA remains our implant of choice. And if you're planning to put a pag later on in life, then porous polyethylene remains the implant of choice. And sockets which are irradiated or multiple socket surgery, especially in children of retinoblastoma who has undergone radiation earlier, then dummy fed ground remains our implant of choice. Thank you.